and welcome to another episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. I am your host, AJ Alonso. I'm joined by my co-host, Alex Ellison. Alex, you've got a pretty nice office there in your background. What's going on? Where are you?
Man, you made the joke about it before I could. Yeah, I'm in your office, in our office.
Yeah, I know you're in my office. So, I decorated it. Is that
yeah.
your family back there? No.
It's somebody's family, stranger's family. You know, I don't know whose Frisbees those are, whose hockey stick that is. Don't know the guy at all. Nothing.
You can tell. Alex, it's not just you and me and you in my office today. We've got a fantastic guest with us, Ethan Beute. He is the chief evangelist over at BombBomb. And today we're going to be talking about grabbing attention, everything that has to do with you as an individual person reaching out to someone and trying to wrestle their attention away from whatever they might be doing to convince them that, hey, I'm worth your time. Ethan's done a ton of work at building out some flowcharts and processes and systems and tips and advice and everything related to this topic, and really excited to dig into it with him. But before we go ahead and actually get into the meat of the conversation, Ethan, let's give you an opportunity to introduce yourself, tell the audience who you are, what you do, what BombBomb does, and how you kind of ended up in your current position.
Cool. Thank you so much for the invite and the opportunity. I'm excited about this conversation. I'm mostly excited because of your personal passion in one of the charts you mentioned. It was like what got us together. So I'm really excited to get into it. But yeah, my title is Chief Evangelist at BombBomb. It's been my title for about 3 years now. And the title came, there are a lot of places I could go with the way you teed that up. So I'll just go with the title, which I think some people might find interesting or at least unique or different. Came because I proposed interviewing a gentleman who was a chief evangelist. I proposed hosting him as a guest on his own podcast. And he said, I'll do you one better. And I said, I want to talk about chief evangelists. He said, I'll do you one better. Find 3 other chief evangelists and I'll run it as a 4-part series. And so I wound up getting Guy Kawasaki, probably the first chief evangelist ever at Apple. And he's now chief evangelist at Canva. Dan Steinman from Gainsight, Sangram Vajre from Terminus was the gentleman I reached out to initially. And then Dave Isbitsky, who is the first employee in voice at Amazon in Alexa and Echo was his evangelist zone. Wow. And so I ended up writing it up. My longtime friend and team member and my boss, our chief marketing officer here at BombBomb, Steve Passanelli, read it and he was like, that's really cool because I just did it for fun. He was like, this is awesome. We need an evangelist and you're the guy for it. And the reason that was true at the time is that I had spent 7 years from the earliest days at BombBomb helping pioneer this movement of video email and video messaging that I think has become more normalized. But I actually made the chart as a reaction to one of the ills that I saw in the space around video email and video messaging. But I believe in it deeply. I love the team here. I like our values. It's been a fun journey. We're a bootstrap company, so that in and of itself creates like an interesting decade-long journey.
Yeah.
And I think that everyone listening to a podcast like this can benefit from video email and video messaging, whether you choose BombBomb or one of the many other competitors that have come up over the past few years. It will be a nice add to the way you're trying to connect and communicate digitally and virtually for some reasons that we might get into deeper into the conversation. And the last thing, prior to that, I spent a dozen years running marketing inside local television stations in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Chicago, and where I am now in Colorado Springs, and got bored of that and started doing project work on the side and ended up connecting with the 2 co-founders at BombBomb, did project work, and then became an employee.
Crazy. From project work to chief evangelist, no less.
Totally.
That's a long path. Cool. And so I've mentioned it now, you've mentioned it. I'll include it in the show notes so that anybody listening can see it, but the chart sort of in reference here in terms of the different pathways you can take when connecting with someone, grabbing their attention and moving into either sort of the bucket that everyone wants to be in, where you're a trusted resource that you actually can get someone's time and bend their ear and have a conversation with them, and talking about how to eliminate the deleted or ignored bucket from the opportunities that you kind of present to yourself. So I wanted to dive into that sort of as a whole and frame the conversation around the different pathways you can take within that chart. Starting at the top, obviously, it's attention, right? Like that's critically important. You want to grab somebody's attention. It's more difficult now than ever. I made a graphic a little while ago called the Sea of Bad Prospecting, where it's a stupid little graphic where it's like this tidal wave and you just see like LinkedIn messages and shitty emails, honestly, like kind of cascading into people's inboxes. And I would say now more than ever, the noise is thick and cutting through it is more important than ever. So I want to lean on you a little bit and ask for good examples of ways that you've seen SDRs cut through that noise and really grab somebody's attention to just start a conversation, right? Like before you can even relay value, before you can even prove who you are, like how can you just like let somebody know I'm here and I'm worth your time?
Yeah, I mean, the next thing down. So what I was trying to do in setting up the chart was, you'll hear some people say like attention is the currency of the economy. And I saw people using video email and video messaging simply as an attention getting tool. And the problem is that's just the first step. And where we need to get, once we have attention, we need to reward that attention. And so I say, one of the things I've been saying lately is that ROTA is more important than ROI. It's a necessary precursor to ROI. So your return on investment of any effort, whether that's honoring all the 8 steps of a particular cadence, or whether it's all the work that you do through a month or a quarter or a year, the return on that investment of your time and energy is much more likely to meet or exceed expectations if first you value the return on someone else's time and attention. So that's the ROTA, return on time and attention. If we spend more time focusing on the return on that attention, then we're going to get to the path that we want to get. And so the next step down from attention in that chart was familiar or unfamiliar. Now, these are all very generic terms, but it's like, oh, I recognize this person, I recognize this name, or I recognize this brand name, and I have some associations with it. But I think in most cases in an SDR process, you're going to be probably unfamiliar. Unless you've got really good high quality air cover in the terms of like account targeted ads and those types of things. Hopefully you do have that, but generally let's just say it's still approximately unfamiliar. In that scenario, you need to give them, I use the word novel, it's something of interest, or some perceived value or the promise of some value. And so I think where we go wrong in general in this phase or in this moment is we're probably starting with lists that are too wide and emails that are too wide, and voicemail scripts that are too wide. And so instead of like finding 1,000 people that fit these 2 or 3 criteria and trying to give them all approximately the same thing with either, machine added or human added, I'm air quoting for listeners, personalization elements, just like kind of dumb, basic slug stuff. But I mean, you and I have seen this. I want to see your wave now, like your wave of bad stuff. What I'm thinking about is, so on my profile on LinkedIn, I've co-authored 2 books. And so I put each one of them as like a company and, announce myself as the co-author of this book and
I already know where this is going. Yeah.
And link to it and stuff. And so it's like, hey, everything that's going on at Rehumanize Your Business, how personal videos accelerate sales and improve customer experience, right? Like the full title and subtitle of the book is like slugged in for my business name. And it's just like so obviously bad. And so anyway, I mean, so that's what I'll say. It's like, it's some aspect of being a little bit more narrow and a little bit more focused and a little bit more specific. And I'm not going to propose gimmicks or tricks. I think if gifts have worked for you, that's cool. Keep doing them. If writing kind of playful, pun laden copy is like your brand personality, cool, do it. But I'm not going to say like, that's not the magic answer. The magic answer is being more targeted and luckier. And by luckier, I just mean, we've all known for years that we're selling to a budget. We're selling to a position. We're selling to a window, right? There's a window of opportunity. If your email comes 3 months too early or 3 months too late, you might miss the window, or you might, we all deal with like, how do we follow up if we're 8 months early with someone who fits the other criteria? So we know we're selling to a window, but then the other one is this priority, I think, is even more important, because the window, I think in general, if you have a decent targeted list, the window is actually wider than you think. I'm not making this decision in the next 3 days and you just missed me because you're a week or 2 weeks late. You're on my radar. What you're doing is very interesting to me. I'm open to continuing the conversation, but I have 2 things that are much more important to me right now in Q2 or Q3 or whatever. And so then the challenge becomes from there, of course, how do we stay in contact and how do we follow up and how do we make sure that we can maybe ascend in priority in that scenario? So I know that's a lot more roundabout than you asked, but in general, it's about giving someone something that sees them. This is for me. This is about me. I should know within the first 10 seconds what this is, why I got it, and what's my opportunity to proceed. Like, is this for me? Is this about me? Because if I can't detect that this is for me or about me, and this doesn't mean putting in my name, this doesn't mean putting in my title. It's like in the first line or in the subject line, is there something that says this is for me or about me? That's where it all starts. That's kind of this novelty thing of like, this is different than all this other garbage. This actually feels like it's for me or about me. And that's insanely challenging. I don't envy the job of an SDR or a BDR for that matter. And I've never performed that role directly. But I talk with a lot of folks in this area, and there's no magic answer to any of it.
Yeah, there's no magic answer to really anything in sales, realistically, when you think about it. And people always look for it, right? I remember when I was an SDR, a lot of like the internal workshops and stuff that we had around grabbing attention were in relation to, hey, what's the best subject line you can come up with to try and grab someone's attention? Okay, well, this one worked for me this one time. Let me like replicate it and try and send it out to 100 other people. It's like, well, no, it worked for that person because it was probably really relevant to that person. They saw something, like you said, it was for them and it made sense for them to open it. That person's different than the next person on your list, different from the next person on your list and the next one. So you can't just like replicate that one thing and hope that it works for everybody. And I think that's like a common pitfall for a lot of SDRs who are properly trying to grab people's attention, is they will use some catchy subject line and be like, well, it worked once, I'll blanket it and get it out there. But more often than not, it's not the case. There is no magic bullet associated with being able to grab someone's attention and start moving down the right track of the flow chart.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
totally agree.
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, and then that's a really good point and something we've talked about a lot on here. But I'm wondering, sort of take it back to some of your earlier points a little bit. When we're talking about familiarity, right? There's no bullet point to create that familiarity. But you did just touch on maybe some ideas for getting them in the pipeline, getting your name in front of them, your company's name in front of them. If you're an SDR, like you said, at a company that's unfamiliar, maybe the marketing team's not that good. What are some of the other strategies an SDR could use just on their own, within their own outreach and prospecting to work to make their name more familiar without coming across maybe as pushy or like not relevant in any kind of way?
Yeah, a couple ideas, and one of them, yes, does involve video.
Nice.
As much as possible. I know this is beyond the control of a lot of SDRs directly. I know that a lot of them are executing playbooks and sequences and cadences and things that have been handed to them. But there's also, hopefully, if you're in an approximately healthy culture, there's a balance of the orderliness of order and the disorderliness of creative freedom, that you have a little bit of space to make some of these decisions for yourself. A big idea, I don't know how novel this is. You guys have a lot more of these conversations than I do probably, but it's to make all of these touch points talk to each other. I think so often people in your subject line example was a great one, AJ. It was this idea that one of these touches is going to be the one, and it's not. It's the collective effect of these touches. It's the associations, it's the feelings, it's the so make the pieces talk to each other. I think it's a very common and accepted concept that the voicemail's job is not to get the appointment, or perhaps not even to get the call back. It's to humanize, it's to speak to, it's to convey a little bit of personality and enthusiasm, to put a voice with the otherwise, faceless email signature or the simple face on a LinkedIn message or whatever. Make all of these touch points talk to each other. For example, I've seen a lot of success with people who will leave a voicemail and then they'll follow up with a video message, and they'll refer to the other in the one. So making more of these touch points talk to each other, so it becomes this thing like, oh yeah. And so the video's job here isn't to close the deal or necessarily even get the appointment. It's to say, hey, my name is Ethan. I'm the guy that sent you those last 2 emails. That one had a really great piece in it. If you haven't looked at it, definitely check it out. It's, we built it on by talking with 15 other people in your industry about the challenges that they're facing. I'm also the guy that left you that voicemail. I just want to put a face with the name, let you know that, blah, 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 the reason I'm reaching out, and, an opportunity to step forward when it makes sense. And so the job of the video there, again, isn't to close it, isn't to play some kind of novelty hack type thing. It's to put a legitimate human face and a little bit of that interest, enthusiasm, argument, idea, the reason I'm reaching out, to kind of put that all together in probably in a touch like that, 45 seconds or less, and to complement the typed out emails, to complement that content piece that you sent, to complement the voicemail, to complement the LinkedIn connection request. And this is how that familiarity becomes built. And so I would also say that mixing in videos, I would hope that a good SDR is reading and hopefully commenting within the spaces that they're operating on LinkedIn. Like they're either following or they've connected with several people in the space so they can continue to get to know the personality, get to know the key themes, to follow the trends, et cetera. And you're starting to drop comments and things. And so that's going to result in some LinkedIn connections. Sending a video message to a new LinkedIn connection is a great way, again, to become familiar, because despite my best efforts and other people's over the past decade, most people aren't doing it. Even a generic one where you're not saying their name and referencing the town that they're in and telling them a fun story about how you both used to work at the same company or whatever the case may be. It could be an evergreen video that you just introduce yourself, the key things you're interested in, and thank them for the connection done by. And so that's the job of the video at that stage of the relationship, is to add that piece to, like, okay, I recognize the name from LinkedIn or from an email signature, or I recognize the voice from a voicemail, but now here's this dude in his office or his home office, or here's this gal in her office or home office, being who they are and making themselves available, and kind of, again, bringing to life, closing the gap, and being more approachable and more familiar, so that the next time you reach out, you're more likely to get a little bit more of that time and attention.
Yeah. I've referred to this in the past, the way that you spoke about how all of these different touch points need to complement one another. The way that I've always looked at it when I was an SDR, and now as we help create content for SDRs, is that your job is really to carve out more space in your prospect's brain for your name, your brand, what you do, how you can help. And you do that by tying together a bunch of different value propositions that make sense for that individual and conveying them through LinkedIn, video, email, voicemail, whatever it is, so that instead of the first time I reach out to you, Ethan, hey, it's AJ Alonso, you're like, who is this guy? I've never heard of him. I've never heard of his company, whatever. The 15th time after you've received a LinkedIn connection request and a video, and I've sent you some great content, and I caught you on a cold call, you're like, oh yeah, AJ, like, I recognize that name because I've built up a lot of that familiarity over time. So I'm no longer just a total stranger to you. And I think that bridge between, like, I'm just reaching out a bunch to get familiar with you, and I'm doing it in a thoughtful way where I'm tying together a story as to why we should actually have a conversation, is the missing bridge in a lot of what SDRs are doing. 12 touches might be enough, but I would rather get 4 thoughtful touch points from an SDR than just get bombarded over and over and over again with a message in the hopes that something they say resonates with me, right? Like it's almost like spaghetti at a wall, hoping that this value proposition resonates with me more than the last one.
Yeah. And I'll reinforce that with an easy takeaway line. Every message you send trains people to open or delete your next message.
I like that. Okay.
And so if you leave me a crappy voicemail and send me a crappy email, then I'm now learning, because you said, like, okay, 15 touches over time. There are 2 directions that could go. One is this kind of trusted, you've demonstrated warmth and competence, you've delivered some value, and I trust you and you're familiar to me, and I'm going to pay you attention in priority order with whatever else is happening in my LinkedIn messages or in Slack or an email or on my phone. The other path, every other path, goes to ignore, delete, or block. And so, two adds to this. Humans are obviously pattern making machines. We learn to make associations. We have to make tens of thousands, and most science will say somewhere in that 30 to 40,000 decisions a day range. Most of them are subconscious, because we would be mentally exhausted before we got out of bed if we consciously made all the decisions we have to make during a day. And so that's why we're training people. As your name becomes familiar with me, it's associated with something positive, neutral, or negative. And obviously we want to be in that neutral to positive range so that people are still at least receptive to the ideas we have, even if they're not yet receptive to us as human beings. But I do think we undervalue being receptive as human beings, and then people being open to our ideas, by the way. I mean, I think we generally lead with argument rather than personality. And the truth is obviously somewhere in the middle, and depends on who's on the other side of it. But I digress. So every single time we're asking for someone's time and attention, we're training them, whether or not we see them, we understand them, we appreciate them, we value their time and attention. And so this is why we need to be more thoughtful and careful than ever, not to just play this raw numbers game, to go a little bit more narrow, to balance effectiveness with efficiency. And you already said this too, AJ. You're like, I'd rather send 4 really good ones than, than the alternative. This is, I'd rather be more effective than more efficient, because at a certain point, we're going to burn out. Let's just say our list is 1,000 people. And let's just say our product is really only appropriate for 40,000 people, let's say 40,000.
Very finite.
Yeah. I watched a video from Jocko Vanderkoy, founder of Winning by Design. Awesome dude. He's been on our podcast. He was featured in chapter 3 of Human-Centered Communication. And the Winning by Design YouTube channel is just loaded. It's crazy and fun.
They
and
pump out so much content.
Highly intelligent. So one of the videos that I referenced of his is he breaks down with very realistic math. If you have a target list of 1,000 people and you have a 1% unsubscribe rate on a 10 email sequence, either executed 6 times by 1 rep or executed by 6 different reps, he walks it out to essentially lose 470 of those people, 47% of the list over the course of, like, I guess that turns out to be 60. The math works out. And so I think we're overlooking the negative. We focus on the conversion. We're like, awesome. I was at 104% of quota. We lifted this from 2.4 to 3% conversion. That's a 25% lift. We're freaking geniuses, but no one's talking about that other 97%. And I think now more than ever, because, and we've already established this too, the environment is noisier and more polluted than ever. Humans are then forced to make decisions faster than ever. And we're enlisting more machines to help us make those decisions. So I don't know about you all, but BombBomb.com is a Google Apps domain. So I use Gmail to check my email. I have to now go into my spam once a week at least, because there's always something useful in there. Always. Because the machines are enlisted to help us. Mm-hmm. And, depending on who's controlling the settings, they can be overly aggressive. And so in light of the fact that it's so easy to be ignored, deleted, or blocked, or get filtered out, or whatever, we need to value other people's time and attention, or else we're training them that we're not worth it. And 4 is better than 12 in a lot of cases.
I like that. 4 is better than 12. Yeah.
4 really good ones.
Yeah, 4 really good ones. I wanted to touch on something that you had brought up before, and ties directly into what you just said, this idea of novelty within your flowchart. The fact that if I deliver 4 novel messages, it's better than 12 generic messages, right? Something that maybe someone hasn't seen before, or a message that is molded in a way that isn't expected of the recipient. I think novelty it goes hand in hand with creativity. A lot of SDRs, you had said it before, if they have the leash and freedom to be creative within the bounds that they've been given by their organization, you see a lot of really cool novel messaging get sent out from this function. But then the flip side is a lot of organizations don't want to give SDRs that responsibility. They want sales ops individuals, they want heads of sales, they want people other than the frontline individuals writing the messaging, putting together the playbooks, and getting the word out. So I want to ask you, I think I know the answer to the question I'm about to ask, but like in terms of creating that new messaging, how important is it for SDRs to flex some of their creative muscles there? And what are some of the best practices around creating something novel from a function as realistically low on the totem pole and inexperienced as that of the SDR?
Yeah, first I'll say I really like your language around, like, I'm thinking in my head guardrails. I forget what word you use to kind of trigger that for me, but like, give me the boundaries, give me the core, give me the set, and I'll operate within it. Trust me to do that. Trust me to make my own, best decisions, after some successful period or after I've proven myself in whatever way you deem like, okay, this person, I can trust them with our brand name and our email domain and et cetera.
Yeah,
Likewise,
this isn't a day one SDR. They've been here for a few months at this point.
Right. Totally. And so in that case, and we talk about this a lot in human-centered communication, where Steve and I, my CMO and co-author, we interviewed 11 different people. A lot of them are sales leaders, and in depth, great depth. And this pattern emerged immediately. Formulas or outlines, not scripts, right? Like, these are words so that you're not starting from scratch, but you don't have to use the exact same words every single time, because when you do, A, they don't always apply. B, you might have some interesting information or a nugget or an insight that you could use to improve the likelihood that someone's going to receive it and feel this, like, this is different. And that's what I mean by novel, by the way. I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time, I didn't dwell on these words that I chose like in the chart, but like novel is just a stand for like, this is a little bit different. This stands out a little bit from the noise and the pollution that I'm faced with all the time. And it's because I can see myself in it a little bit, right? And so as for creativity, I want to speak to both personality types here. Some people are like, I'm a highly creative person. This is the minority in general. I'm a highly creative person. I want to flex my creative muscles. To those people, I would say, honor the boundaries and guardrails, because they're there for a reason, right? They're there because they have, I assume, been proven to work at some level. And so use what you learn, but stay somewhere within the boundaries. If you're constantly pushing that, you're not going to have fun. A, you probably don't know as much as you think you know. B, you're probably being more clever than you need to be, and clear always beats clever. Now I'm starting to bridge to the other personality type. And then 3, you're not going to get unless you're murdering your numbers. You're not going to get along very well, with your immediate supervisor, because there's this constant tension of like, but dude, we've talked about this. We've talked about this 3 times now. Can you please? So that kind of a scenario. To the other people, though, that hear the word creativity, like, I'm just not that creative. This isn't about creating things from scratch. This is about, how can I take the puzzle pieces that are in front of me, or how can I take, the cutout patterns in front of me and turn them into something really good? And it's filling in a little bit of the gap. It's connecting 2 points that seem disparate, but really actually belong together. I mean, creativity by definition is the intersection of what's novel and what's useful. And so, the highly creative types want to go on to novelty, right? And just like do stuff that no one's ever seen before, but they're missing the utility piece very often. And the person who doesn't deem themselves creative is probably over-indexing on utility without so much novelty. We haven't quite seen it done this way before. And I just want to honor people that are investing in themselves by listening to a podcast like this. You're more creative than you think. And all it is about finding a little bit of a twist or a little bit of a nugget, or inserting that extra little thing that is going to speak to that person as well as you can know that person. I know that, some people are selling high ticket items and they can put a lot of, with a really great margin, and they can afford to put a lot more time into these touches than other people. The margin isn't there, or the price point isn't there. And so they have to be a little bit more efficient and can't be as creative or invest as much time. So I know that I'm speaking to a wide range here, but I would give more people permission to be a bit more creative. And I would say to a leader that's listening, you hired this person, you interviewed a bunch of people, you hired this person for a variety of qualities and personality types and experiences and some demonstrated or described expertise. You maybe put them through some steps. You probably gave them a personality profile. They check all the boxes. I know they haven't ramped yet, but ramp them with the expectation of trust to operate with some creativity. That's why, like, you had a bunch of people to choose from and you pick this person. And the other thing I would say too, is you pick them a lot for their personality traits, and yet you're hiding them behind faceless voicemails and faceless typed out emails that you wrote for them. Let a little bit of that personality come through in the voicemail, in the writing, and on video.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree 100% with what you're saying. I would love to dive a little bit into, you're talking about the combination of novelty and utility, right? Because, and AJ, I think you were talking about an actual email you received the other day with me about someone who like said something clever at the beginning and like tried to start this conversation with you on LinkedIn about like a passion of yours, but they never connected. They were great with the creativity or the novelty, I should say, but they never connected it to what they're trying to sell or the relevant side of things. So I want to let you answer in a minute, but AJ, I don't know if you want to fill in any other details about that, but I'd love to hear if you have any like strategies, ideas, best practices that you've seen people use to combine things that may be pretty disparate concepts and turn them into something creative that turns that novelty into something relevant for the prospect.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the situation was very simply like this individual noted that I was a member of RevGenius, which is a very well-known community for sales and marketing people. They were also a member of the community, but they had been in for only a few months. So they were like, hey, like, saw we were both members of this community. I've learned a ton, like, great. And then they just moved into a pitch. Like, it was basically like disparate sentence number one, disparate sentence number two. The second portion just happened to be a pitch. It would have been a templated email had they not just put that first section in there. So there's like a continuity issue there where they say one thing to grab my attention, right? And then they move it into something that has absolutely nothing to do with the first thing. So I actually ended up fully rewriting the email for this individual, this SDR, and I presented it to them. And I was like, hey, listen, like, you grabbed my attention, good job. I would have done it this way. And I rewrote it for them. They were super thankful. And they actually let me know that their organization, which I will not name, was one of those that like put up these faceless playbooks and emails and where like, just stick to the script, just get as many messages out as you can. It's a volume game. And he was like, I'm not happy with this. Like, I would rather be doing the stuff that you're talking about than just sending out a message. Like, I'm kind of in trouble because I sent a personalized segment of this message to someone who wasn't a tier 1 account. And I was like, wow, that's unfortunate for you. But the story has the end point of just like, there's that incontinuity between grabbing somebody with something relevant and then not tying it into the actual utility of the message. So I'd love, Ethan, to hear from you about like tactics that someone might be able to use to make that tie-in so the message has some continuity associated with it, and it's not just section 1, section 2, please buy my stuff.
Yeah, what I would do, I like your idea of the rewrite. That's very kind and generous, and I think more people could do that if they had the time to do it. By the way, it
takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it's a fun exercise, and by the way, it's probably a really good recruiting technique. It sounds like this person is like, open to other opportunities where they could learn and grow in a different way. And so I think that's always an interesting thing, and I've done that intermittently when I've had time to do it. And I'll typically reply back with my MO would be to reply back with a video and say, I get what you're trying to do here, but you could do it better with a video. And here are a couple tips on that. And so what I would have probably done if I had gone to the trouble of like AJ shows up on my list, I go do 2 minutes or 3 minutes of research. I see that we're both in RevGenius. I establish his tenure and I'm being new here. I probably would have found a way to ask a very simple kind of yes or no type of question, like related to it, that was kind of product or service oriented for like whatever this guy's representing, that is anchored in something related to RevGenius. Like, hey, and as a member, I assume that something, do I understand that correctly? Right. And I think not enough people are thinking about this as initiating a conversation and not doing it as a game, but as a reference point. I think it was Gong data that interest calls to action dramatically outperform direct calls to action. This interest is like easy to answer questions. The goal isn't to set the appointment on the second email. Right. It's to generate a reply and to like do some even perhaps if you can, some discovery or even like at least very initial pre-qualification. If someone gives a hard no to an easy yes or no question, that's better than a no reply in a lot of ways, because it's, at least it's a confirmed feedback signal.
Something you can get like something tangible out of them.
Yeah. So I would, instead of going into the sales pitch from there, I probably would have gone into like an easy yes or no question that would have said, like, are you even interested in this at all? Would you like to learn more about this at all? Or, and this is way out of the bounds of an SDR. But for a range of people listening, I mean, that would have been a perfect opportunity to say, you've been involved for a couple of years now. I've been involved for a couple of months. Do you have 15 minutes where I could just ask you about your experience with Rev Genius and the best way to get, really good value out of the experience? I've had that. I'm in Revenue Collective, or Pavilion is what they are now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had that conversation. Now I know I'm not an SDR. I'm not prospecting these people, but I've had that conversation with a number of people. And so then they become resources. And then I wind like, it's like those small pieces over time where you start getting tagged in LinkedIn comments,
Mm-hmm.
Alex might have something to say about this, and so it's this kind of like, this is that familiarity piece again,
right?
The familiarity without the threat of, getting hard pitched.
Yeah. And I think I know I am, and I think a lot of us are kind of hardwired at this point to when somebody does, you can smell it when they reach out on LinkedIn and they try to connect with you, and it like is veiled as something personal, where it's like, oh, I'm asking about a hobby of yours, or I noticed, I got this the other day, like I noticed that you are a fan of Pokemon. It's blatantly on my profile. It says it right there in the headline. Starting a conversation with that, I know within 2, maybe 3 messages, it's going to shift to be like, oh, by the way, are you struggling with content management? Like, what are you doing? Right? Like,
Yeah.
you can tell when it's coming. So I think that's a really good point. Like, you don't want to actually sell somebody when you're initially connecting with them, right? You want to have that conversation. You want to build that familiarity, like we were talking about. And ultimately, you want to build up some trust. And that's sort of the segue I want to get into the next section here, because that's kind of the ultimate goal of your flowchart, is to become that trusted resource for someone, so that when they do tag you on LinkedIn asking for your advice, you know that it's because they actually want your advice, and it's not a thinly veiled pitch to whatever it is they're selling. It might get there eventually. You might build up enough of a relationship where you have a number of back and forths, and you begin to realize, oh, this person can actually help me with something. But that shouldn't be the goal of the conversation to start. So I'd be curious to hear from you, outside of what we kind of just mentioned. What are some other really good ways to like earn the trust of the individual people on your list, so that you have this longer term vision of making sure that you are a resource for them and they come to you when they are experiencing challenges that you can solve?
Yeah, I'm going to get a little bit vague, I guess, to start, which I know is not perfectly satisfying, but we'll get to something useful. I promise. Because and part of it really is, and the reason I'm starting there is like, I'm still in this mindset mode. Do you value people's time and attention? Do you see yourself as a trusted resource? And I think especially for a younger person in their career, they might not have that muscle or view of themselves yet, where they feel like, I do have something to say here. And what I'll say to that person is, you do have something to say here. You can be, because, let's just say your target is a VP sales in a company that's 50 to 150 million in revenue in one of these 3 verticals. Well, if you're having an initial discovery conversation, or even just a cold call that they actually take, or if you're having conversations of even basic substance a half dozen or a dozen times a week, you have something to say to the next VP of sales, because just in the past week or 2, you've talked with a dozen or 2 dozen people like them. And they know other VPs of sales, but they might be in other verticals. They might be at different stages of companies. Like, you have something to offer these people by focusing and consistently talking with these people. You have insights to share, probably more than you give yourself credit for, and probably more than your supervisor might give you leeway to accept, acknowledge, and trade on. You have really interesting knowledge because you have stories you can share. You can anonymize them. You don't need to embellish them. And you don't need to promise 50x ROI on your product or solution. It's like, hey, I've talked with 4 other people in your industry in similar roles just in the past, 72 hours. And it's something I've heard from them. And I was curious to know if you're feeling or thinking the same thing. Like that becomes a useful and interesting conversation. And so doing that consistently and trading on this unique perspective you have on this, sure, that VP sales might have 20 years of experience in this vertical and you have 20 months. Or 20 weeks.
Yeah.
But you still have a unique perspective that can be useful to that person. And so, so that's one way to look at it, is this kind of mindset of like, am I really here and can I be useful to this person? If you don't believe those things, you're not going to be successful, period. You need to believe those things. And this kind of bridges into the other core idea and the two other words that follow trusted on the chart, which are warmth and competence. Warmth and competence are the two criteria that every human being judges every other human being by. They are the basis of judgment of every social judgment, warmth and competence. And the thing is that warmth trumps competence. And the colloquial way to say this is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And I know that sounds a little bit soft for a lot of people, but it's true. And so by warmth, we're talking about things like, and this goes back to believability, it goes to your intent. What is your intent? What is your motivation? Do you seem to believe what you're saying? Do you seem to have my best interests in mind? Do you seem to understand me? This is all the warmth stuff. It doesn't mean you come across as like, call me buddy when you don't know me and you're going to turn me off right away. It's not that. That's not warmth. Warmth is I'm motivated. I'm sincere. I believe in what I'm saying. I actually think I can help you. I seem to understand you a little bit and I want to know a little bit more. Like those are the warmth elements. Those need to be present before anyone cares about your pitch, your expertise, your experience, your product, your feature, the competence piece. And now if we just walk this out from an evolutionary perspective, 1,000 years ago, if you made all of your decisions based on someone's competence without judging their warmth first, the consequences could very easily be fatal because they have their own interest in mind, not yours. They want to take advantage of you, et cetera. And so now, obviously, the consequences of anything we're talking about aren't fatal, but it's a waste of my time and attention, which over time is definitely very, very costly. And so we're looking to judge warmth before we judge competence. And that's why it's so ill to have like that non sequitur into a product pitch right after you're trying to start delivering some warmth. And so I would just encourage people to honor the human side of it. I mean, if the SDR as a human being didn't matter in this situation, it would already be turned over to a bot. And if the human is not going to add human elements or human qualities and leverage the fact that there's a human in this role, then it's going to eventually be turned over to a bot. And I do still personally believe that if the math can work out, that a human is better than a bot in any basically complex situation. Like BombBomb isn't that complex. And we can't afford to put a human being on a live demo with someone buying a $29 product. Now we also sell team accounts to hundreds or even thousands of people, and we do put humans on that. So the numbers have to work out, but I also know that there are people who are willing to spend $50 a month or $600 a year with us as an individual, and they just have two questions. And maybe the support site doesn't tackle it perfectly well. And so in a lot of these roles, a human being plays a really important piece. And so if you're now to the manager, if you're asking your people to perform as bots, you're underutilizing the resource that you're investing in
severely.
Yeah. And if you're in that role and you feel like a bot, have a little bit of fun with it within the guardrails.
Good caveat at the end there. Yeah. It's like, I listened to this podcast and this guy at BombBomb said I could just kind of do whatever I wanted messaging wise. So that's why I sent over
back like 10 minutes and I feel like we leveled that problem.
I'm curious because we've talked a lot about and we just talked about it. The fact that a lot of this it's complex human interaction. It's not something that you can automate. It's not something that you can just easily flip a switch on a bot and have them execute this complex outbound sequence to build familiarity and gain trust with people. It is innately human. And so I think that the common second question that someone always has in this situation, because a lot of managers are very numbers focused, is like, okay, great. How do I scale this? I can't expect my reps to sit down and only make 4 instead of 12 touch points to this individual, because I have to make sure that they're getting out enough volume to warrant any investment in this function at all. So I'm wondering is this scalable? And B, if it isn't scalable in the way that I think a lot of people want it to be, what would you say to that individual to kind of ease their maybe concern about having an SDR who isn't just go, 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 and a little bit more thoughtful and critically thinking critically about the job?
Yeah, a couple key ideas here. So it really is. This is the crux of the whole thing, because everyone's like, yeah, but easier said than
But
done.
money, right?
Well, yeah, or just like, yeah, it sounds fine when you talk about it, but try to, spend a week in my role. And in the challenges, this is where the art and the science have to come together. I think we've overly scienced a lot of this stuff. That's why it's a bit dehumanizing. The gentleman that you were talking with about the terrible email he sent, like he's in a dehumanized position. It's just like the factory work in Henry Ford's assembly line that, I don't know the history of unions, but at some point people got together and like, this totally sucks. And like, we need a better working situation. So like, and I'm not suggesting that any of these roles are sweatshops or that they're assembly lines, but we're only 200 years removed from the onset of the Industrial Revolution, 100 years removed, about 110 years removed from the onset of Henry Ford's assembly line. This is still deeply baked in how we think about how we should be operating. Mm-hmm. And so a couple key ideas here. One, I think a lot of people have tried to scale systems and processes prematurely. They tell themselves this doesn't scale before they've done the hard work of feeling the real pain of pushing it right to the edge where you actually know for a fact this isn't scalable. But at that point, you've collected enough information that you can scale it much more effectively. Mm-hmm. I think when we scale, while there's still a little bit of an ignorance gap around, what is actually working here? Why are people actually responding? Who's responding and who isn't? Like a lot of that stuff. I've learned so much. Like I joined this company when we were 6 people, and now we're about 150 people, about 200-300 customers, now about 70,000 customers, basically zero revenue to over 25 million ARR. And there are things that we couldn't systemize or make a process or automate yet because we didn't understand it well enough. Should this even have a process around it? Or is this just like not critical enough? Do we understand who this is for and what it's about? Have we, so that there's just a lot of work that's done physically manipulating numbers, not just, running a rule set at it and seeing what chart it produces, but actually manipulate, working like line by line in the numbers and the account names and the zip codes and the states. Like there is so much to be learned by just some of that hard work. So I would encourage people, not to be afraid of the hard work and prematurely scale, because you're going to scale mediocrity in general, or perhaps even scale failure. So that's one caution. To the other side, there are things the goal is defined what jobs are right for the machines and what jobs are right for the people. And so you already mentioned like someone getting scolded for over investing on an account that wasn't a tier 1. So that's obviously one way we can do it. We can tier these things and say, here's about how much we can afford to invest in a tier 3, a tier 2, and a tier 1. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use machines or content marketing and look for the signals, right? Which accounts or which people have done X and Y and Z. I want you to vote real human attention to people that have done X, Y, and Z. If you've just done X and Y, then we're going to make 1 or 2 human touches and just kind of suss it out, validate it. And so these are different games we have to play based on, our cost of acquisition, our lifetime value, like all these things, like it has to work out. But when I hear issues of scale, what I'm hearing is this strong bias towards science and efficiency and not enough respect or appreciation. I know this is going to sound soft to the wrong people, but not enough respect for kind of the art and the effectiveness. And the last thing I'll share is that we all know that it wasn't the subject line. It wasn't the voice. It wasn't because we switched these two sentences in the voicemail. Like, it's about how we make people feel. And I think when we respect that there are all of these immeasurable components underneath every single measurable outcome, we know this is intuitively true. We know we bought this car instead of that car, even though the list of pros and cons for that car is like way more in favor of pro, but damn, that one is just so cool, or that interior is sick, or like the finish on it is amazing, or like whatever. I know it breaks down a lot more than this other one. Like, we all know that this is true, that there are immeasurable motivations and ideas underneath these measurable outcomes. And so I think a little bit more respect for that, until it's machines making decisions with other machines on what to acquire. We're still selling to human beings, and there's a richness there that I think our systems and processes and the way that we're deploying these tools and techniques needs to honor that. And that is messy and immeasurable at some level. So we need to like build in some of that. It's like hitting into the wind. Like, you got to play to the curve. You got to play to the wind. You got to build some, I guess, space, to go back to the guardrails. You got to build a little bit of padding on the sides to accommodate this kind of like rich, messy, crazy, fun, silly, stupid, irrational, wonderful human experience that's part of the sales process.
Oh, I love that. I think I'll end by agreeing with you. And I think sales is innately a human thing. Like, it's human to human. You could be business to business, consumer to consumer, whatever. It's human to human in my mind. And I think, that gets lost a lot. And it's that authentic human experience that really, I mean, I literally bought a car like a few weeks ago, and it was same situation. Like, I have a very strong internal human pull towards the Toyota RAV4, even if it wasn't the best fit for the family and it wasn't the greatest car they had on the lot. I have experience with it. It comes in a unique color. There's stuff that I can try to justify, but internally I know it's just, I have this pull towards it, and I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. It sells.
Yeah. You could do a lot worse than that, by the way. And I think probably the rational decision is something more like the Toyota Sienna, but you just can't do it, right?
Yeah, I can't.
All the arguments point to the Sienna at your stage of life.
Oh, well, maybe one day we'll upgrade to minivan life. Ethan, thank you so much for being on the show and enlightening our audience in terms of this flow chart of attention grabbing and making sure that you land in that trusted, warmth, competent side of things, and not the deleted and ignored, that bucket that no one wants to end up in. If people want to dive more into this idea and get more insight from you, how can they get in touch with you? How can they learn from you? Where can they find you online?
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you seeing the value in that chart. I mean, again, you saw it on LinkedIn and reached out, and like, I'm just super glad to be here.
This fun little serendipitous moment.
Totally. Yeah. And so I really, really appreciate it. Again, my name is Ethan Beute. Last name is spelled Beute. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can basically find me on any social network as Ethan Beute, one word, or Ethan Beute is two separate words. You can email me directly. If you listen to this point in the conversation, you can email me directly, Ethan, ETHAN @bombbomb.com. And, I'm really passionate about a lot of this. My expertise is primarily in video messaging, but I've also hosted a podcast on customer experience for 3+ years and 200+ episodes. And so I am happy to talk about chief evangelism as well. So if anyone has any curiosity around any of this stuff, hit me up. I'd be happy to connect, and happy to answer questions and maybe even spend some time in conversation.
Awesome. I can confirm that your podcast is good. I've listened to it. It's a solid listen. I'm not even in like the sort of, as you would call it, customer experience space, but there's so much that you can pull between sales, CX, marketing. It's all tied together in some capacity. So I guarantee you that listening to Ethan's podcast, you'll learn something, no matter what role you might be in on the revenue side of things.
Thank you. Can I just add one thing in there?
Absolutely.
I know we're probably
Go
at
ahead.
time. The rise of the way I approach it, it's not a customer experience architect or a customer experience strategist thing. It's how do we create better? And I know sales and marketing alignment is kind of like a played out concept, but we're still far from achieving it. So like I'm bringing together marketing, sales, and customer success leaders primarily to talk about the entire customer life cycle and how to make sure that it's this, because customers don't care what team you're on or what department you're in. And frankly, someone listening to this show, an SDR or an SDR leader or anyone kind of in that, early stage, has an outsize effect, especially into human touches, has an outsize effect on the customer experience. You're setting expectations, you're setting the tone. You are the de facto personality of the company until they get exposed to more content and more people and the product or experience itself. And so it's a very approachable show, and the rise of customer experience as a conversation topic is completely aligned with the rise of the CRO, trying to align these functions, completely aligned with the rise of RevOps, which is trying to bring together all the data so we can make smarter, better, more efficient, and more effective touches across the life cycle. So it's, I appreciate you acknowledging that it's relevant to a lot of people. I just wanted to reinforce that and say all these themes happening are because most conversions are not profitable for most companies. It's all about the renewal or the repeat purchase or whatever, right? The initial cost of acquisition is some fraction of the lifetime value. And so we need to align CS in the sales and marketing conversation so that it's more consistent. And then also, there's so much in the experience itself that promotes growth, period. Like, it makes more satisfied employees. It makes more satisfied customers. This is how you get customer references. It's how you get referrals. It's how you get reviews. Like, this all matters, and it all starts with the people who are listening to this conversation. So don't drag yourself into journey mapping if you don't want to, but this broader, higher level conversation, you have a big role to play, and certainly an important voice in it.
Amazing. Yeah, make sure I'll go ahead and add it in the show notes.
Thanks for
I'll
that
link
soapbox.
to the episode. Stay on the soapbox all you want, man. It's good stuff. Make sure to check it out. And while you're there, make sure to subscribe to unsubscribe. Get more content like this in your inbox, more tips and advice on how to up your sales development game. Thank you again, Ethan, for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for watching this episode of Unsubscribe, the Demand Drive podcast. If you want less of those nasty unsubscribe emails in your inbox, go ahead and check out some of the content we have to the left, and make sure that you subscribe to Unsubscribe to keep your SDR team in tip-top shape.